This is no sob story, it's no pity story, it is what it is.
I can do most things anyone else can do. It just takes more swearing and laughing, really.
It doesn't mean we're a worse person. It doesn't mean we're not intelligent.
So it's like everybody has a disability, right? Everybody has disabilities. Everybody has things that they can't do, that they depend on other people for. It's just a matter of scale.
We use the word interdependence. Like, none of us is truly independent, right? We all rely on somebody, usually lots of somebodies, to be successful.
Interdependence may be a reality for all of us to some degree, but it's a necessity for people with disabilities, many of whom need help, a caregiver, for some of life's most basic functions, like getting out of bed in the morning.
If that caregiver doesn't show up at night, I'm stuck in my wheelchair. My life does not happen.
According to the CDC, 1 in 4 American adults, 61 million people, have a disability that impacts major life activities. The most common disability type, mobility, affects 1 in 7 adults.
Like, why do you give a shit? Like, why would you care? All things being equal, why would you care? Like, why? There's no reason. Like, your life's good, dude. Keep it going.
One reason you should care is that any of us could, at any time, become part of this minority group.
Believe it or not, you don't have to be born with one. You can get a disability by just walking down the street. You could have a stroke.
I've heard people say that. I've said disability is the only minority that anybody at any time could enter.
And although it happens to a lot of people when they're older, 2 in 5 elderly Americans have a disability, there are also many younger adults with disabilities trying to live independently. Not that long ago, most of them would have been kept in institutions where their futures were limited by walls and rules. But the disability rights movement has gradually brought an end to many institutions for the disabled.
Disability is a human rights issue. It's not a political issue. It goes both sides of the aisle.
When we talk about people with disabilities, we often don't think about the civil rights movement of people with disabilities, but we in the community think of it that way.
Like, we're trying to put people with disabilities in positions of power, right? Because power never changes on its own, man. You gotta make it. So we're trying to make it.
But the revolution has also brought new responsibility as people with disabilities set out to create lives for themselves in a world generally designed without them in mind.
Watch out, stop. Okay, you're good, you're all right.
Transportation is hard, so if they want to get a job, how would they get to the job?
Transportation is probably the biggest area of concern for people with disabilities.
Transportation affords you opportunity to do things that you would never be able to do.
For many, living with a disability means being forced constantly to make unreasonable choices in their everyday lives. A shower or a meal.
And so if they gave her 30 minutes for dressing a day, but it took her an hour, at some point she was going to have to make a decision, well, I'm not going to eat that day.
Marriage or poverty.
You want to talk about ruining the sanctity of marriage? Look at people with disabilities. You can either stay married or you can live. Your choice.
Struggle to live alone or sacrifice privacy in a group home.
I've lived this way since I was 17 years old. So we're talking 15, 16 years. I don't want to give up my ability to say and do what I want.
And they're forced to make these choices because they live with a disability in one of the richest nations in the history of the world.
We demand to be treated. Why should we expect less? Why shouldn't we have a life? Why shouldn't we have a partner? Why shouldn't we have a job like everyone else?
It's a very much a second-class citizen feeling. My disability is the fault of no one, but unfortunately, the responsibility of me living my life falls on the backs of a lot of people. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's the nature of supporting people with disabilities. And I feel as a nation, we don't take that responsibility seriously.
Regardless of whether it's your vision or hearing, your mobility or your mental capability, having a disability can mean being disenfranchised and discriminated against, often based merely on a first glance.
That people just, they look at me and they don't see a guy in a wheelchair. They see a wheelchair with a guy in it.
No one hired when they found out I had autism. That's the reason why you're at my own firm, because no one was willing to give me a chance.
Inadequate transportation, complicated support systems that allow only basic survival, and discrimination that keeps many jobless are just some of the obstacles faced by people with disabilities who want to live on their own.
And one day I just said, I've had enough of dealing with the system. And unfortunately, they're gonna break me just like they break so many other people into poverty.
In addition, when they do get a job, people with disabilities earn less money.
It can be a pretty daunting thing to just exist as a person with a disability, right? So then you factor in like, how do you thrive? And that becomes like a really hard thing to do sometimes, is like thrive. And like, that's what everybody wants to do.
The reality is we're all interdependent. And so with the right supports, people with disabilities really can make a lot of their own decisions, chart the course of their own lives. They can be very successful at what they do.
But getting the right supports is expensive and exhausting.
Like getting those benefits, that's a part-time job. To have benefits you have to report, you have to call, you have to meet, you have to verify, you have to send it in, you have to do this thing, you have to do that thing. Like, they make me, believe it or not, every 4 years, I have to like verify with them that I still have a disability.
What's your prognosis?
I have cerebral palsy, so there's like no way ever that I'm not gonna have cerebral palsy.
And ultimately, the benefits that are available still might not be enough.
It's not right that I feel failed by a system, For a while I felt like I failed myself, but the truth is I was failed by a system. A normal day, my caregiver comes, helps me do all my bathing and dressing.
This morning, Jessica's day is off to a good start. Her caregiver arrived on time to get her out of bed.
My diagnosis is cerebral palsy. I was born 3 months premature. I'm also a twin. He is also disabled. It's only affected us physically, meaning that we have no cognitive impairment. We're able to live on our own and perform as a average functioning adult.
Jessica Nell embodies the spirit and the struggle of the disability rights movement in our country. She's lived on her own since she was 17. She grew up in Green Bay and also went to college there, earning a master's degree. But in the fall of 2017, she left the familiarity and the comfort of her hometown and moved to Madison in search of a job and a better life. We met her a few months after she arrived.
Coming here, there was a huge security blanket taken off. Even though I have a lot of connections here and they continue to grow every day, I don't have a lot of people I can just call and hang out with, or if my caregiver doesn't show up, who's gonna come and help me? I don't know. I just feel there's so many more opportunities here that if I didn't make the move, I was selling myself short.
Moving meant a mountain of paperwork to set up her various supports paid for by Social Security and Medicaid, housing, medical, caregivers, and transportation among them.
The move plan took about a year and establishing services in a new county, and it's been a rocky transition. It hasn't been easy. Things, don't go as planned always or ever, but that's the other part of living with a disability. You kind of learn to just roll with the punches.
Her lifelong experience with social service systems and her master's degree in social work were finally recognized. She was hired as a consultant to help other people with disabilities get the services they need. It's her first career job since graduating 10 years earlier.
So how have things been going?
Good.
Good. Did you enjoy camp?
Yeah.
It's sad that it took me how many years to get a job. And my entire cohort that I went to college with had jobs within 2-3 months. I've probably applied for hundreds of jobs and interviewed for at least 100 jobs. Employment is huge across the board for all people with disabilities.
And that includes Jessica's twin brother, Ryan, who, like his sister, earned a master's degree in his effort to prove to employers that he was qualified. And like his twin, he found his job search frustrating.
I applied for over 100 jobs out of grad school for over a year, and I got 2 interviews.
And when he did find work, Ryan had to settle for a job outside his area of expertise.
Like, I have a master's degree, okay? I work as a virtual receptionist, and I love my job, don't get me wrong, right? But like, I'm making $15 an hour, dude, with a master's degree. Like, and it's not about like, I want to be rich or like I want to do whatever or like I'm above $15 an hour work. That's not what it is. I'm doing it. I love my job. I think my job's great. But I think that, you know, when you get a master's degree, you sort of have an expectation.
There's a lot of discrimination that takes place. You know, my resume looks great on paper, but I may not look so great wheeling in a wheelchair. Like I told you, people are afraid of what they don't know. So, yeah, she looks wonderful on paper. Look at all those things she does. But can she do the job? What kind of a risk is she to hire?
As she finally began her career, the answers to those questions were still unknown, even to Jessica herself.
You know, what happens when I get sick and I have to take time off of work? But hopefully my employer will be understanding of those things, and you know, that happens to able-bodied people too. It's just a bigger risk when you're in my situation. I have numerous medical conditions that have just come as a part of my disability, kind of along the road. Things have come up and I've had to deal with them. I've had 31 surgeries and I have different other things.
Her health isn't the only risk. The very act of accepting this long-fought-for job put Jessica's entire financial support system at risk.
Now that I am working, I lose Social Security benefits. You know, we live in a nation where government has decided, instead of incentivizing working, we're gonna kind of, okay, if you wanna work, for every $2 you make, you're gonna lose $1, and your rent is gonna go way up. So essentially, we don't incentivize people with disabilities to go to work.
Jessica and the vast majority of people with disabilities in Wisconsin get their medical and home care paid for by Medicaid. They also get supplemental Social Security of about $800 a month. But the government cuts some or even all of that money if they get a job.
Like, sure, I'm working and it feels great, but in a month or two, I'm gonna see a drastic decrease in my supports. So I won't know if working actually gets me ahead. Hopefully I break even. But those are things that people without disabilities don't have to worry about.
Like other people in her position who want to live on their own, Jessica has a caregiver who comes to her apartment for a set number of hours each day.
If that caregiver doesn't show up, I'm stuck in bed. If that caregiver doesn't show up at night, I'm stuck in my wheelchair. My life does not happen. I am at a standstill. I don't go to work. I don't go out in the community. I'm still Jessica. I'm a living human being if someone shows up eventually. Otherwise, I'm going to starve and die. You know, that's how critical it is. There is a huge shortage. It's actually a national shortage. Caregivers statistically are the lowest paid profession out there, and probably the hardest working profession out there. And being able to pay people $9-10 an hour, that's a shame. You know, if I get a really good caregiver and I say, well, I really like you, but I can only pay you $11 an hour, you can go flip burgers for $11 an hour.
The Medicaid caregiver formula sets time limits for each duty performed, 30 minutes to get dressed, for example. But if that task takes longer, it means something else she needs won't get done. The morning we were there, for example, it took a half hour just to get her out of bed, about twice what it should. With 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours at night, her caregiver has a lot to do in a relatively short amount of time.
These people are coming in, they're doing dressing, bathing, very personal cares of toileting, brushing teeth. It's not coming in, some of it is socialization, coming in and providing companionship, but much of it is very physical work, lifting, transferring. My days are pretty regimented. I can't decide. My caregiver comes between 9 and 10 every night, so if I'm out having a good time with my friends, I can't just decide, I want to stay out. I have to go home and go to bed.
Jessica often doesn't know from one day to the next who her caregiver will be, whether they'll be on time, and whether they'll be there at all. She's shared her experiences of being stranded in her own apartment on social media.
I can't describe to you, being stuck in bed when a caregiver doesn't show up, or when a ride doesn't show up, missing something, or maybe just wanting to come home and get out of my chair and get comfortable or change my clothes, or being hungry and wanting to eat something and not having somebody to help me do it. As much as living how I do is excellent and I wouldn't want it any other way, it requires a crazy amount of patience.
Just because a caregiver shows up on time doesn't mean they've been trained on what Jessica needs.
Alright. I used to drive you on the lease. Now what? I'm new at this. They don't exactly send us in here with training,
This mobile body sling is standard issue for getting someone who is paralyzed like Jessica in and out of their power chair. Without training, her caregiver didn't know what to do without Jessica's instructions and our videographer's assistance.
Would you press the number 1?
Yeah. You're not even in the chair.
I know, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Please listen.
Other times, it's not a lack of knowledge, but a lack of communication that gets in the way of Jessica's care. On this day, her caregiver speaks only French.
What is that? Yes, you do. Part of what we do is teach English.
When we left her on that January day, Jessica was full of hope for her newfound future, even as she acknowledged the odds against her.
I'm a 30-year-old woman, and I don't know that I'll ever have children, or I haven't dated yet. I haven't done a lot of things that a lot of people my age have, and there's a lot of things that I just won't be able to do given my physical limitations, and having to come to terms with what that looks like. But then being able to step back and say, look at what I can do. There's a lot of people in my position that don't get to do half of the things that I've gotten to do, live on their own, move to a different city. I've been able to travel.
Grateful and determined, Jessica begins her new job in a new city.
When I was born in 1957, I was born at the Milwaukee County Hospital. I was born with fetal alcoholic syndrome, which was in my system was cocaine and heroin, and they told me I would only live 24 hours.
For some people with disabilities, interdependence begins at birth.
And then after I lived 24 hours, my mother was taken out of my mother's arms. And I was sent to the foster care system.
From the arms of the mother who caused her to be born with a developmental disability, to the home of a foster mother who set her on fire, to growing up a ward of the state, if anyone knows the challenges and even dangers of interdependence, it's Cindy Bentley.
With all the problems I had, health problems, and all the side effects of the fetal alcoholic, the state thought I would be better off in a state institution, so I they sent me down to Southern Wisconsin Center in Unit Grove, Wisconsin, which I was there until I was 26 years old.
Cindy Bentley was born when it was standard practice in the U.S. to confine people with disabilities together in institutions. So she was forced to grow up in one of 3 state centers in Wisconsin.
It was lonely, it was sad because, like on holidays especially, because I didn't have my mother, and my relatives always try to, so I would just be there. People would go home on their holidays, and I'd be stuck there with the staff, which wasn't very much fun.
In her mid-20s, a legal guardian helped Cindy move out of the institution where she grew up to a more independent lifestyle. First, a group home, and then to the Milwaukee apartment she's now had for about 40 years. It was more than just a change of scenery for her.
It was like another kind of world. I didn't know how to do anything out here at first. Take a bus or anything.
Today, Cindy is executive director of People First Wisconsin, an advocacy group for people with disabilities run by people with disabilities.
I always like to try to teach people about me, but also I'm teaching you about people with disabilities. They have the same wants or dreams that you. They want to date, they want to get married, maybe have kids.
Today, children with disabilities are still up against some of the same stigmas and misconceptions that forced Cindy Bentley into an institution some 60 years ago.
Maybe they like kick over a chair, right? And then because they're so frustrated, because maybe whatever, it could be a variety of things. I try to get people to understand that behavior is communication, and it's communicating that there's some unmet need that we need to fill.
Anna Moffat's understanding comes from about a decade of firsthand experience.
My youngest son, Felix, was diagnosed with autism at about 2 years old.
Once Felix was ready for school, Anna found herself the student, learning how to advocate for her son's needs in the Madison public school system.
This is my binder of different things that come up. I think that has been a challenge, just kind of working with school. But I have to say, people have been open. He requires a lot of financial resources to provide an appropriate education for, and that means those resources may come from some other place. So I have had some challenges around him being accepted into the school community. I would also say I think I've had to build awareness about his behavioral differences.
It's called mainstreaming, bringing students with disabilities into the regular class schedule while providing individual education plans to address their specific needs.
Well, some of our students with autism can have some pretty significant behavioral issues. They aren't able to communicate with their words.
Hi, Felix.
But that doesn't mean there's no communication. Pepin Karras is Felix's primary teacher, and over the past few years, they have developed a bond of trust and understanding that's allowed her to find the ways he learns best.
With Felix, he started off knowing how to read 14 words when I started working with him last year, and he just finished his 153rd word with me last week. And so he has now a functional reading level of a first grader.
Federal law requires public schools to provide students with disabilities an appropriate education. But the law also says the government is supposed to fund a large portion of the budget to pay for special education, and that hasn't happened in decades.
To quote Justice Roberts, an individual education plan is just that. It must be individual for the child. Very simply, free appropriate public education means they must be provided that. And they must be provided the same opportunities. We are not asking for a Cadillac education, we are asking for an equitable one.
Nikki Vandermeulen has been fighting for an equitable education since she was a child diagnosed with Asperger's, first for herself, then for others, as an attorney, disability rights advocate, and member of the Madison School Board. In fact, she's one of the few, if not the only person in America on the autism spectrum serving on a public school district's Board of Education.
The reason I ran for school board is people always spoke for me, and I'm glad they did. But now's my time to speak for me and to speak for the disability community. because we want the opportunity to speak for ourselves. Because we have rights, but we haven't advocated for them, and now we have to say no, because otherwise we're going to be eradicated. Part of me is so frustrated with that, and part of me goes, people are afraid of what they don't know. People are terrified of change.
As a child, Nikki watched her parents diligently advocate for her in school. She took the reins in college, graduating from the University of Wisconsin with both undergrad and law degrees. Now she's made education for other people with disabilities one of her top priorities as an attorney.
We haven't had a funding increase on special ed in the state in 10 years. This means less aides. It means less teachers. It means less support. Because of that, we have kids who will cause a disruption, and the teachers are trying to control it, and it escalates. Then the security is called, and then it escalates, and then the police can be called.
Just because of, our students don't always have the ability to communicate with us, and they get very scared, and so they react physically sometimes.
Pepin Karras has been injured in the line of duty by some of the young students with disabilities she teaches. She says the numbers point out the daily challenges she and her colleagues face.
There are significantly more students. We have 48 students who are with disabilities who are served by 4 case managers. It means that, for example, we have to have 2 students who are similar to Felix, only much younger, work together with one assistant teacher. And so when one of them runs off, the other one tends to run in the opposite direction, and then it can create some safety situations.
Far from a perfect situation, teachers like Pepin Karras and parents like Anna Moffat insist it's worth the effort and the money to include students with disabilities in the school mainstream.
Felix has all of these skills and talents, it's just he has to learn in a different way. And so if we're teaching him to read now, that means he can walk out of high school being a reader and getting a job, living in the community, being a taxpayer, being part of the community, and that's much better for the general public down the road than Felix being placed in a residential care center doing nothing, or doing totally substandard wage work where he gets 4 cents, an hour to do something, because then he's not going to be able to be like putting anything into the tax base.
And beyond the fiscal bottom line, research shows that mainstreaming is best for both students with and without disabilities.
Because we have a very multicultural, pluralistic society, and you're going to encounter people with disabilities in your everyday life. And it really helps to know how to work with and play with people who are not just like yourself.
Society did not have that attitude when Cindy Bentley was growing up, but now she teaches about inclusiveness from her own unique perspective.
First of all, I'm an African American. I have a disability and I'm a woman. But I don't look at the color of my skin. I look what's in my heart. I always tell kids, it's not what's on the outside, but it's what's in your heart.
I was at a graduation party, lake near my house, and I dove into the water, off a dock into the lake, and I hit the bottom with my head and crushed my 5th vertebrae.
Perhaps the biggest mistake any of us can make as we watch and hear from people with disabilities is to think that it won't happen to us. Remember, we're all just one step or leap or crash away from becoming part of that group.
So we got in the car and we were out for maybe just 10 minutes before a drunk driver ran a stop sign, and I lost my mom, my dad, and my little brother, and I was paralyzed in that accident.
Whether they've had an accident, a health emergency, or perhaps a crippling experience as a member of the military, people who acquire disabilities later in life face monumental physical, mental, and social adjustments just to get their lives to an even keel.
The hardest thing I had to get used to being a person with a disability was asking for help.
Jimmy Anderson was a 20-year-old college student when a drunk driver changed his life forever.
Being a quadriplegic means I don't have use of my hands or my legs, And so you end up having to ask for help for a lot of times, and I was a really independent person before. I had to get over that relatively quickly. I would say the first year after the accident, it was learning to live this life. You know, what does it mean to be a quadriplegic? What does it mean to be disabled? What are the obstacles that I'll have to get over? And so, you know, it's baby steps. It's, you know, what does getting up in the morning look like? What does getting into bed at night look like? How do you get around town? And then it starts to, well, all right, I've kind of got this basic life stuff figured out. Now, how do I move on to, like, if I want to go back to school, how am I going to, you know, write my legal briefs, and how am I going to be able to get to school and back?
Not only did he figure out how to get back to school and finish his law degree, Anderson used that experience and knowledge to run for and win a seat in the state assembly in 2016. He's the first Wisconsin lawmaker to serve in a wheelchair since 1970, and it was his experience that put him there that pushed him into politics.
Coming out of the surgery, my health insurance company sent me letters saying that I was nearing my lifetime maximums on my health insurance and that they were going to kick me off. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was scared. I was just a student at the time. I knew that I still had, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills to go, and for the rest of my life, it was going to cost even more. And it was 2 days after that I got another letter from the insurance company saying that the provisions of the Affordable Care Act have just kicked in that got rid of those lifetime maximums. And it was such a complete relief. I recognize the fact that I do have to rely on other people to live my life, but to be able to direct it in the way that I want, I think is something that's incredibly important to me, and I want it available to every person with a disability.
I was a very miserable, angry young man for about a year and a half, 2 years, something like that.
Nick Zowski planned to join the U.S. Marines as he celebrated his 18th birthday, 3 days before the swimming accident that changed his life forever.
You know, I was in the hospital for, you know, God, I think like almost 6 months. It was scary for me to go home. I can't imagine these kids nowadays. They're sending them home in 6 weeks. Yeah, with no real fundamental training. I mean, this is such a huge difference in your life. You know, there are things that are literally life-threatening that you should know before you go that people aren't learning.
Nick has now been a person with a disability longer than he was a person without one. He says he realized what his future held as he lay in his hospital bed.
I knew that you know, there was nothing that I could do to change it, so I wasn't going to wait around and, you know, and hope, I guess. Everyone thought that I was being, you know, that was part of depression, I think, like that because you know, I wasn't hopeful for a cure or something, like, you know, they thought like maybe I gave up or something, and that absolutely wasn't. It was the exact opposite. You know, it's just like, no, I know that it's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen in my lifetime now. I know that.
Instead, Nick put his hope towards making a life for himself as a person with a disability in a world that he says is often focused on the wrong aspect of his situation.
Rather than you know, $500 million a year, and, you know, if they looking for a cure, if they took that money and modified people's homes or vehicles or something, they would do more to change lives than they will ever hope to accomplish with this cure stuff. I wish that they would take that money and put it towards something that was actually useful in my life. You know, bladder function, bowel function, sexual function. You know, I mean, just make life actually better.
More than 2 decades after his accident, Zowski has a full-time job, a modified van he drives, and an apartment in Madison. But his successful interdependence is constantly put to the test in public.
Because people get quiet, you know, around, you know, they see someone with a disability and they're like, you know, they don't want to upset the apple cart or whatever, so they're quiet and they kind of tiptoe around, or they like talk in like the baby voice, kind of. I've even been out with an ex and had people come up to her and ask her, as she's standing beside me, does he want something to drink? It happens.
But even when they have a voice, people with disabilities often find themselves struggling to be heard by those they need to reach the most.
I'm just a regular dude, right? Living like a regular life, working a full-time job. Like I have a minivan and a dog and a wife.
Earlier, Jessica Nell mentioned that she was a twin. Her brother, Ryan, is also confined to a wheelchair with cerebral palsy.
Oh, there's an eagle.
Ryan and Andrea met in La Crosse when they were both in college.
In order to be in a relationship with me and spend time with me alone and like build that relationship, there are certain things you're gonna have to like be okay with, and like certain things you're gonna probably have to like help me with. And like if you're not really like into the relationship, if you're just like not really like invested in it, it's probably just like gonna be really uncomfortable, and you're not gonna be okay with doing those things, like helping me go to the bathroom and like helping me transfer and like doing those kind of things. Andrea didn't even like bat an eye really ever. Like she was like, yeah, obviously I would help you, right? Like, and it never was even really uncomfortable, which was something that was like really uncomfortable to talk about with previous girlfriends. Was
yes, there is some like complications like sometimes, but like it's just like any other like relationship. I mean, like it's, you know, you have relationships with friends or with partners that are intimate, that you share feelings, that you share, you know, thoughts, dreams, whatever, and like that's our relationship.
Ryan referred to Andrea as his wife, but technically she's not, and probably never will be.
So I get SSI, supplemental security income, because of my disability, and if we are married, they combine our incomes, and so then I would exceed like the income limit for getting certain benefits like my insurance and stuff like that, so I'd have to start like paying pretty substantial amounts to like get my needs met.
In order to get Medicaid, which covers both medical and home care costs, people with disabilities cannot own more than $2,000 in assets. The limit is $3,000 for a married couple.
We'll get married, but we won't get married on paper. Or that's what I want.
And like I don't want to have to like it's not even like it's not even like it bothers me because it like won't happen necessarily, but it's like I don't want to have to explain systematic oppression to every person I meet who's like, when are you getting married? Well, then I have to like explain like, well, we're probably not, and this is why.
But like we still don't have marriage equality in this nation.
Here's another place where interdependence gets complicated. The caregiving that's so critical to people with disabilities who are living on their own is yet another issue they must navigate in their personal relationships.
A lot of outside forces like expect me to be primary caregiver, and a lot of people expect that within the system and within everything like that, and that's not gonna happen because like that's not realistic.
Even though Andrea is there and does help when necessary, Ryan has a hired caregiver who comes in during the week to help with the routine stuff. The danger is people start to see each other as patient and healthcare provider rather than husband and wife.
I think that it's very easy to cross the line from romantic partner to caregiver when you're in a relationship like this, and I think it's very important to have explicit dialogue about like how you're going to create those boundaries so that you can preserve the thing that makes your relationship special and it makes it different from other relationships that you have.
By now, you may be wondering about other aspects of Ryan and Andrea's relationship.
When like people see us in town, like they don't like think that we're in a relationship. We're like in a romantic relationship or anything like that. They think that maybe I'm his sister, or maybe I'm his nurse or teacher or whatever, or I'm with him because I feel bad. I mean, because we don't think of people with disabilities as people that can have romantic relationships or sexual relationships or sex at all or anything like that. So like this is like a lot of times like that's not even discussed because like we got to get to square one of like, yeah, we're in a relationship.
And I think one of the sort of interesting things to think about when you're like contemplating this is like in order for this relationship to work, like I have to be very vulnerable to Andrea because she's got to help me with some very intimate things like bathing and other personal cares and things like that. So I have to be a very vulnerable person.
We also talked with others who share different but equally challenging experiences of being a person with a disability or two people with disabilities in love.
We met at Easter Seals Camp Wild Beak. It's in the Wisconsin Dells. We met when I was 8, Julie was 9.
Over the next decade, Jason and Julie developed a long-distance relationship between his home in Madison and hers in Eau Claire. By 1996, the young adults knew they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. For them, that meant getting married.
We got married legally. We lost half of our benefits, and it was immediate. It was the day that you signed the license, your stuff cut in half.
Did that not make you, did that information beforehand not make you think twice about?
No.
No. Because we knew the ramification of it, and like any married couple that they loved each other, they were going to make it work one way or another.
As it turned out, there was a solution for the cut in their income. The cause of Jason's disability, spina bifida, was found to be the fault of the U.S. government.
My spina bifida was linked to when my dad was in Vietnam, and he was there during the time where they were spraying Agent Orange.
And because of that, the government agreed to support Jason and the other 1,700 or so Agent Orange babies with income and medical care for life. Most other people with disabilities don't have that safety net.
Whatever, we got married. And about a month into it, I got a letter in the mail. I was losing all my stuff.
So what did you do when you were married?
Got divorced. Quick, fast, and in a hurry. Went up to the courthouse, got the paperwork, and did it. Because, I mean, it was detrimental. I mean, I would have lost everything. Talk about ruining the sanctity of marriage. You can either stay married or you can live. Your choice.
Nick Zowski found out the hard way that getting married with a disability has consequences, and they're not just financial. His marriage and other romantic relationships have involved women who do not have disabilities, and similar to Ryan and Andrea, that means keeping his caregiving separate. And it's not just to separate the two intimate relationships.
But even beyond that, if, you know, there's a power dynamic. So if you are with someone that, you know, that you rely on, and they do something that really makes you mad, you have a tendency not to say anything because, like, you know, crap, I want to get up in the morning. So you don't say it. And that can really cause some issues.
Romantic relationships are often complicated for people with disabilities for various reasons. Nick has found that for some people without disabilities, there's a certain attraction that runs so deep, those people are sometimes called chair devotees.
And honestly, it's not just physical. I mean, like anyone else, you know, you have physical triggers. You know, you like what you like. But I've also heard them explain that a huge part of the attraction is watching, you know, seeing someone not only progress, but that has been dealt such a horrible thing, and make an actual life out of it. These aren't my words, but you know, there's a beauty in strength.
Good boy.
Interdependence takes many forms. Like many of us, people with disabilities have gained from advances in technology.
Anybody with almost any kind of ability problems can drive.
But the most important interdependents come in human form: family, friends, and hired caregivers. And let's not forget the others who have their own way of caregiving, the ones that always have your back.
Amber has trained Gabby to do is to pick things up and put them up on her lap for her.
But people with disabilities also rely on each other a lot to make their lives better. They live by a code: nothing about us without us.
The way you do it is education. The way you do it is through the vote. And the way you do it is just continue speaking on, and you make your point of, no, I'm not going away.
Nikki Vandermeulen has committed her professional and personal lives to protecting people with disabilities from discrimination.
This is how you're treating another human being. And we need to become political. We need to become active and say, no, we demand better. We deserve better.
Jason and Julie Endress have been advocates almost all their lives. As youngsters, both were so-called poster children for their disabilities and helped to raise money for treatment and research on TV telethons.
You know, it was more educational back then, so it was giving a face to the agency.
Today, they drive across the state, sharing their experiences and advocating for the rights of people with disabilities.
By me advocating, hopefully 25 years down the road, when a family has their first child and they're disabled, they're not going to have to go through the same hell that my parents had, or Julie's parents had, or any other family that I know go through the same hell that we had to.
Cindy Bentley has a job that allows her to help other people with disabilities. As the head of People First Wisconsin, she works to keep people out of institutions like the one in which she grew up.
What I've learned, you don't have to have a college degree to do advocacy. You just have to be yourself and what's in your heart.
Will members and visitors please take your seats? The assembly is in session. Will members and visitors please take your seats?
Jimmy Anderson was so inspired by what he experienced after being paralyzed by a drunk driver that he created a nonprofit support group and then got himself elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly.
But it made me realize that you have to get involved and you have to care and you have to be a part of the process in order to get good changes for society. I think more so than anything, I think it's been helpful for other people with disabilities to see somebody in the office just doing it.
And you don't have to run for office or officially join the disability rights movement, because when you have a disability, you're automatically a spokesperson.
There are, misconceptions that people just automatically think about us. Don't automatically assume that, we lead miserable lives or whatever. Like, I get this all the time from people. Talking with them for a couple of minutes, like, wow, you have such a great attitude. And I start to question people, like, why wouldn't I? And they're like, well, I don't, like, because you assume that I have a miserable life and I'm, sad all the time and I'm just home alone crying in a corner.
Creating mutual experiences is like the biggest part of this, because it's like all of oppression comes from lack of understanding or lack of empathy, in my opinion. Like, that's the root of it all, is ignorance.
Too often, people with disabilities find they don't have much of a say in what happens in their lives, even when it comes to fun and games.
Because, like, my experiences, like, with adaptive sports are just, like, not great. It's like a bunch of able-bodied people who feel really bad for you.
Ryan found what he was looking for in power soccer. You see, among the things his cerebral palsy hides is a strong spirit of competition.
It was like a part of me that had never really been, like, unleashed before.
Besides the spirit of competition, this particular power soccer team, the Wisconsin Warriors, offered Ryan and his teammates even more, the chance to actually run their own team. For people who often have little to no control over even the simplest aspects of their lives, this is of profound importance.
Like, we talked a lot about this as a team, like, that we wanted to, like, have control of the organization and all of that, and, like, keep the power. And I think one of the things that you do in life, if you want to be, like, believed and, like, you want people to, like, believe in what you're doing, is to, like, live your values. So, like, that was really the goal, was, like, how do we make this about player control and, like, not let a bunch of able-bodied folks, although they might have the best intentions, tell us how to run this, because, like, we're sick of people telling us how to do things. So we're going to do this. So that's what it is, man.
Jessica Nell has spent years advocating for people with disabilities, and when she moved to Madison, she was able to take that to another level.
I had a wonderful coworkers. My job was absolutely the best thing I could have asked for.
She got what appeared to be the perfect job as an advisor to other people with disabilities about how to navigate the Medicaid, Social Security, and local systems needed to get health care and supports. But after finally finding professional success, Jessica began to find failures in her personal interdependence.
I was having more and more caregiver issues than I should have been having. And as a result of those caregiver issues, I was having more and more health issues, and it became hard to perform my job, and I kept pushing and pushing and pushing to keep striving at my job and being successful. But I came to the realization that working wasn't going to work, at least right now, and I had to choose to, unfortunately, resign from my job recently.
Because she has some medical issues besides her disability, Jessica can be vulnerable to infections and other health problems if she doesn't get consistently adequate care. And that's exactly what happened.
The other huge factor was transportation. As much as transportation is wonderful in Madison, if you don't have somebody willing to pay for it, it's just a shame to see that, you know, these circumstances really took away my biggest goal.
Besides losing her job and paycheck, Jessica must also wait 90 days for her Social Security payments to resume, 3 months with no income. And beyond that, she could also end up losing something she values just as much, if not more than money, the ability to live on her own. The only way to get the reliable care she needs may be to live in a group setting where caregivers are always available.
I'm cautious about it because I am very prideful about my independence. I've lived this way since I was 17 years old. So we're talking 15, 16 years. And I don't want to give up my ability to say and do what I want. It's not right that I feel failed by a system, you know. For a while I felt like I failed myself, but the truth is I was failed by a system.
Would you do this again?
Absolutely.
Interdependence, a delicate balance of relying on others for independence. We're all just a mishap away from needing the support and the systems that millions of people with disabilities struggle with every day.
This is no sob story, it's no pity story, it is what it is.